Live on AMP Sunday night, fresh off a barn burner in Vegas, and Taylor Swift was not involved, but the Steelers and Raiders were. Colin, how you doing?
Good. I think this is just how Pittsburgh's going to win. And I think that they're basically, when they face offensive lines, they can manipulate. I did think their defense got a bit gassed in the fourth quarter. Jimmy could go to his second or third receiver. You couldn't do that in the first half. Couldn't do that in the first three quarters. So, I mean, I think every great defense, if they're on the field enough, and that's the problem with the Steeler defense. They're fantastic, but this team leads the league in 3 and outs. You know, they're kind of an old school. If they beat you over the top, they can, but they can't really run the ball. Pickett will let it loose. He moves okay, but it's a big play offense occasionally. And so I thought at the end, the Steelers defense just got tired, and it gave Garoppolo a little bit more time to operate. He moved outside the pocket. But I think this is just, I think there's a complete ceiling with it. But I think this is just how Pittsburgh's going to win. If Matt Canada is your OC, this is your O-line, and Kenny Pickett's your quarterback.
I agree. One thing that's pretty clear is that they drafted Najee Harris pretty high, and he's just not that good. He just looks kind of like an average, run-of-the-mill running back. Kenny Pickett's athleticism actually is one thing that makes him a little more functional, because arm talent is nothing special. I mean, you watch two guys tonight that just do not have great arms. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo's arm, to me, is getting dramatically worse, and I think the Steelers, TJ Watt, I don't know if they're going to win enough games usually to be the defensive player of the year. I guess JJ Watt had some years, but they were still making the playoffs. If this team's not a playoff team, but he has 25 sacks, I mean, he's on a torrid pace right now. He's a fantastic player, but offensively, I'm with you. I mean, it's not pretty.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this today, that I counted outside of about 8 NFL teams. Kansas City, Burrow's fine, Cincinnati, the Rams. Stafford, I still think, has a couple of really good years left if they can protect him. He's still really good.
Agreed.
Philadelphia, Baltimore, Buffalo, Jacksonville. There's about 8 teams right now that shouldn't draft a quarterback. Everybody else, if I'm New England, I'd draft a quarterback. I don't think they're in love with Mac Jones. Las Vegas, obviously. Denver, New York Giants, Minnesota, absolutely draft a quarterback. Despite the NFL altering rules for the last decade, all favoring offense, John, about 8 teams in this league can consistently score, and that's about it. And I think these 2 teams tonight, again, these quarterbacks, when pressured, O-lines are both really average. Points are a premium. And I think that this is why they keep altering the rules. A lot of your better athletes, these edge rushers, we can't find offensive linemen in this league. There's just too many good there's edge rushers everywhere. You can't block Max Crosby. You can't block TJ Watt. I just look at this. I look at the Steelers, and their recipe is, listen, we can win 10 games a year just on defense and a couple of over-the-top plays.
Well, if you look tonight, everyone thinks Matt Canada is the village idiot, and I think a lot. Listen, I'm not saying he's Kyle Shanahan or McVay, but his personnel's not great. We're on the flip side, Josh McDaniels now. This is his second opportunity in 15-plus years. Obviously, the Denver thing a long time ago. He tied his hands to Tebow, tried to be Belichick 2.0, and he was ran out of the building within a year and a half. This is not going well, Colin. And he tied himself immediately to Jimmy Garoppolo, who, listen, I know people love to be like, well, Purdy would look the same. Jimmy Garoppolo is just not a very good player right now. His arm strength is greatly diminished. His decision-making is horrendous. I got a text tonight from an NFL exec that was like, how do you have Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs? And they basically had 7 points, 55 minutes of the game. Like, what is going on? This guy, listen, obviously when you have Tom Brady, you're going to be a better coach, but he was viewed as just an excellent schematic X's and O's chess player. And you're watching him now as a head coach. It just looks terrible, Colin. I don't know how else to say it. He looks over his head a little bit, and he's tied himself to Jimmy Garoppolo.
Well, Mike McDaniel is so creative and clever with Miami, and Shanahan is as well, as you called him, Mike McDaniel, the Ivy League Shanahan.
Yeah.
And then McVay, I think, also falls into this really clever, the ability to basically reformat his offense in an offseason. Andy Reid, we know, is really clever. there's a very small handful of guys that can really do they're magicians, and they can do a lot of different things, right? I kind of feel like Josh McDaniels has an offense. This is what it is. He needs the right left tackle, the right quarterback. Whereas I think Shanahan, McVay, McDaniels can kind of use their personnel, and there can be limitations at quarterback, limitations on the offensive. Miami doesn't have a great offensive line. Rams don't have a great offensive line. Doesn't matter. They figure out a way to make it work. I kind of feel Josh McDaniels is one of those, you ever have a college professor, and he's good, but it's basically the same lecture for 30 years. Like, this is kind of the act he has. He hasn't really added to it. And everybody that goes and uses him for years and years, oh, I remember old Professor Johnson. It's the same tricks of 30 years ago, and he's never updated things. And I kind of feel like Josh McDaniels has an offense, and it's only as good as the quarterback. It bombed with Tebow. It was great with Brady, and it's limited with Garoppolo. I could be wrong on that, but it's not super clever. It's predicated on who's throwing the ball.
I would say the other thing is these New England guys, they always hire other New England guys, where McDaniel's a good example. He'd never work with Vic Fangio. Hires Vic Fangio. Why? He's the best defensive coordinator on the market. They need to upgrade that side of the ball. And you look at, Josh McDaniel, what does he do? He goes get Patrick Graham, who was with Joe Judge, who was with Bill Belichick, and they've all worked together. They all stay so insulated as a group, where look, Sean McVay, he's gone outside before. He didn't know Brandon Staley. Kyle Shanahan had never worked with Steve Wilkes. You got to be okay with thinking outside the box sometimes on your position coaches, but specifically the coordinator on the other side of the ball. I mean, the Raiders defense is just, they've been drafting high for 15 plus years, and they're just always terrible. I mean, look, they draft a guy in the top 10. That's the other thing. Personnel wise, you draft that guy, from Texas Tech over Jalen Carter, and Collinsworth was saying it tonight. He just doesn't look very good. You take that guy 7-8. I mean, he's got to have some impact on the game, and he looks, like a mid-round pick at best.
Yeah, their best player is Max Crosby, who I think was a fifth rounder at a directional school in Michigan, and he's their best player. And on defense, best player Devontae Adams, Fresno State guy, who's been good in the league for a long time. All right, I want to talk Cowboys. So the Cowboys were missing 3 offensive linemen starters, and so there's some of that. Up to 4 different offensive linemen played, and I think the red zone is where average offensive lines go to die. It's congested. You need the push. Teams that have great old lines like Philadelphia are generally great in the red zone. It's hard enough to block. It's really hard in a congested space when you have a limited playbook, right? You half your playbook you can't use when you're at the 7-yard line, So when you're going with backup offensive linemen 4 at one point, Dallas wasn't going to be great in the red zone. But I do think it points out, when I watch Dallas play, I think more than they want to admit, it's a little like Kirk Cousins. And I've always said Dak's Kirk Cousins with more mobility. There's a way Dak is good. He plays with a lead. He throws 34 times or fewer. It's complementary throwing. It's play action throwing. And I think Mike McCarthy knows that. And that Mike McCarthy trailed late in the game. He was still running the ball. And Mike's thing is, I'm not going to have him throw 45 times a game. I know how this turns out. He'll throw interceptions, make mistakes. He'll get dogged all week in practice. I'm not going to have Dak's confidence going to the tank. I don't want that narrative entering our season. And so they played kind of conservative, trailing in the game. That was my take, is that Mike's like, listen, I know the outcome. When Dak throws over 35 times, he's got a bad record, a losing record. And I think Mike kind of felt like, I'm not going down there. We're just gonna run the ball if we can get one of these things. And I feel like with Dak, there's a way to play. Now everybody's crushing McCarthy for the game plan. And again, they moved the ball. They actually ran the ball pretty well. They moved the ball. They were just bad in the red zone. So my takeaway is, I don't think McCarthy is a great coach. But I do think there's a way to play with Dak. This is not how they win with Dak. That's my take.
Well, today's a good example on McCarthy. They get in the red zone. They're 1 of 5, right? They could not, like you said, they moved the ball. They ran the ball for almost 200 yards. Pollard looked fantastic. Yeah. When I have CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard, and Brandon Cooks, and I get within the 10 or 5 yard line, I have to have a couple plays using motions, some trickeration that Andy Reid, that McDaniel, that Sean McVay, to just get some layup walk-in plays. You saw it all around the league today with these innovative offensive minds, and you watch them. You're right. They're missing guys. The offensive line penalties today. Remember a couple years ago, they led the league in penalties. That was cropping up again today. But understandable sometimes when you have new faces in your front five. But to not have just a couple go-to easy walk-in touchdowns today, because let's face it, Arizona's played pretty well this year. I mean,
yep.
they were very feisty week 1 against Washington. They were kicking the shit out of the Giants for a half, and today they brought it. I mean, they were flying around. If you didn't know that all of us thought they were going to suck, you'd go, that's a solid NFL team. The quarterback looked good. Defensively, they were flying around. But, yeah, I mean, listen, Dak's been who he's been for half a decade now, right? He hasn't changed. He's been solid. But, like, that pick toward the end of the game, which ultimately at that point in time, they probably weren't going to win anyway. But that's kind of him, Cousins does, like you said, the same thing. And this is where I get back to not have just whether it's a zone read play that Dak can get a walk in. Jordan Love had that play today on the goal line where he scored a touchdown that kind of, got the momentum back for them. It feels like sometimes McCarthy's just kind of banging his head against the wall. And listen, I thought Dallas was a legitimate Super Bowl contender. You watch games like today, the coach and the quarterback, man, if they're not, you're going to have to beat some really good offensive play callers and some really good quarterbacks. And McCarthy, man, there's a reason he didn't win a lot of those NFC championship games. It's not like they went to 4 Super Bowls and only won the one with Aaron, right? They went to 5 NFC championship games, and beside the one they won, they never won any of those games.
Something magical happens when the third quarter ends and the fourth quarter begins. The energy changes. The fourth quarter, that's where games are won. And in business, it's where sales teams become legends, the fourth quarter. That's why HubSpot built Sales Hub to give sales reps the deal-making tools they need to win in the fourth quarter and close the year strong. Sales Hub Prospecting Workplace organizes your schedule, your to-do lists, your goals all in one place to save your team time in the precious fourth quarter. Smart sequences help sales reps close deals faster than ever. Plus, AI forecasting helps you accurately predict future successes. And with an easy-to-use management tool, reps can find, track, and close deals all in one place, which means less hoping for deals and more crushing targets. Put your sales team on the fast track now to winning the fourth quarter with Sales Hub. Learn more at HubSpot.com/sales. Football is officially back. No more preseason games. The regular season is here. Listen, we all like watching football on TV, but nothing's better live and in person. And the best way to get tickets to any of these games is at Game Time, the fastest growing ticket app in the entire United States. For last-minute amazing deals on tickets to see your favorite football team in September, download Game Time. And it's not just for football. Baseball playoff games, comedy shows, concerts all across the country. Download the Game Time app and use the redeem code COLIN, COLIN, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Get out and have some fun this weekend, baby. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets. Lowest prices guaranteed. Game Time. For a limited time, you can save up to 40% off on an NFL Plus Premium annual subscription when you sign up through Plus Play from Verizon. Plus Play. It is a platform where you can shop, manage, and save on the subscriptions you already love, like NFL Plus. With NFL Plus Premium, you get access to live games on mobile, NFL Red Zone, NFL Network, and more. So you can watch multiple games all at once on any screen around you for updates. Never miss a touchdown. That simple. And for fantasy players, NFL Plus Premium makes
all the difference. Access to programming like Fantasy Live through the NFL Network, Red Zone for tracking player performances on a Sunday, access to live local and primetime games, access to Fantasy Plus. Just go to Verizon.com/NFL to get NFL Plus Premium today. 40% off, that's 40% off an annual subscription, just $59.99 for the full season. Get it before it's gone.
One of the things that is really interesting, Jimmy Johnson was really outspoken about Brandon Staley. And if you watch, I watched every second of that game. Both those teams were trying to give that game away. The Chargers, outside of Justin Jefferson, and maybe there's a safety for Minnesota who's really good, the Notre Dame guy. It's been in the league.
Harrison Smith.
Yeah. I mean, Chargers have better players all over the field. It's not even debatable. Better O-line, better pass rush, just have better roster. But what was remarkable about Brandon Staley going for it on fourth down at the 24 is that Minnesota, number one, had no timeouts left, had struggled to block increasingly in that game, struggled to block the Chargers front. So no timeouts. You punt it. Let's say they fair catch it at the 30, 35. They need a touchdown to win. They have no timeouts left. And the pressure has increased on Kirk Cousins, who's not a big throw the ball down the field, not a deep ball thrower anyway. And they really had abandoned a lot of that because they just didn't have time to set up for that. They couldn't get the protection. And he goes for it. And then not only does he go for it, the worst skill player on the field is the guy who gets the ball, the backup running back, because Austin Eckler didn't play. And I'm like, well, timeout. That wasn't a tough one. No timeouts. I mean, you're a defensive coordinator. You're getting great pass rush, and they can't call a timeout. They have to get into the end zone. I thought it was almost a fireable. I thought if they lost that game, you could fire them flying back home. Now, am I overreacting to that?
Well, I thought if they lost the game when today started, before the ball even kicked off, I don't see how you didn't fire him. Now, I'm not shocked at him going for it. This is what he's been doing for 2.5 years. Like he's gone for it in insane times. Remember a couple of years ago against the Raiders, he went for it like I think at the 20-yard line, not even at the 24. Now it was earlier in the game, but I also think when you talk to people around the league, these owners and a lot of GMs, and you know, Telesco, are very numbers driven and are very pro the quote unquote go for it, where historically that was never the case in football. It was much more conservative. You always punted and played defense, which is that tide has clearly shifted. To me, like he's going to go for it. He's been doing stupid shit his entire tenure as the Charger coach. It's more just about the way the defense looks. They look like a really good Big 12 team that can score on anybody and can't stop a soul. You're talking gaping holes, Colin, when they were, you know, where is everybody? Does anyone know what's going on defense? It happened a lot also, for Lincoln at Oklahoma forever. It's like, we all know we're not on the same page here.
The Chargers are returning all their starters. Now they have the kid from USC, the rush end. But essentially it's the same starting group. And they're a bad third and long defense. It's like, terrible. Guys. So they didn't play J.C. Jackson today. And my takeaway was when you play the Vikings, you can't let Justin Jefferson get over the top. And J.C. Jackson just doesn't have – he's not football smart. I don't know him personally. He's not football smart. It's why, by the way, it's why Belichick let him go. Belichick just gave up on him. You know, say what you want about Belichick on offense. You almost never beat New England over the top, ever. I mean, you have to drive the length. And so the Chargers didn't play him. And my take is he's just not football smart. Like he just is in the wrong spot. He bites on anything. And so they said, if Justin Jefferson doesn't beat us over the top, we're going to sit J.C. Jackson. We're not even going to dress him. And we'll just keep everything in front. And Kirk has to drive. And by the way, it mostly is effective against Kirk. That's a heavy penalized team. It's a heavy turnover team. The game plan was solid. But they are so poor. There was at least 2 moments, could have been 3, where they bailed the Vikings out with defensive penalties, like on 2nd and 20, 3rd and 15. You're like, guys, there's a lot of veterans on this field. This is just defensive coach, returning starters, guys that have been around, multiple undisciplined penalties. I
You could justify firing him, I think, even with the win. Like, where's this going? What are we doing? It's the same thing every week, win or lose. They always look the same. How often does an 8 to 10 yard completion turn into 27 yards? Defenders running into each other, bad angles, and they get so many explosive plays that is a pretty basic 7-yard, slant route that goes another 26 yards. That's why they were able to constantly get back into the game, because they can't tackle a soul. The defensive backs now for 2.5 years never feel like they know where they're supposed to be. Like you say, J.C. Jackson, they just waved the white flag on that one. They said all this money, whatever, healthy, inactive. But the guys that were out there today, and this is what I think people are so critical of him, that he's a defensive head coach. He's really, when you're a defensive coordinator, you're in charge of the coverages. Like, that's the most important thing, right? The coverages against, and clearly the coverages he's calling, his players do not know how that he wants them to execute it, because they're all over the map on any given call. Guys out of position, guys wide open. It does look like a college team that is having to win, on a weekly basis, 48 to 45. That's kind of the way they have to play. But in the NFL, that's very difficult because your margin for error is so small. Offense, you're going to screw up sometimes. I mean, he was 40 of 47 today. Now, he got lucky on the one touchdown that could have been a pick, but he is playing really, really well. And I know that sometimes he gets pushed back. Well, why don't you win more? If you just watch the Chargers play, you will understand why he just doesn't, quote unquote, win more.
Yeah, I mean, he basically, without Austin Eckler, they have no run game, so it's a short passing game. And I don't think there's a quarterback in the league, maybe Mahomes, who is better on the catch it, throw it to the perimeter. That's not as easy as it looks.
No.
Herbert, it is a complete layup. He must have had 18 of those today, maybe 25. Catch it, throw it. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, it doesn't matter. Gerald Everett. It's by the way, that's not a layup for a lot of guys in this league. It is a layup for Justin Herbert, just out. Well, even cross field throws, easy stuff. So pivot to this. I mean, it's very obvious that, Zach Wilson, he's not a franchise quarterback. And I think we all knew that coming into the season. They're going to punt on him. I think the Chicago Bears are very likely going to have the number one pick. Arizona, Josh Dobbs as a backup to Kyler Murray is actually a pretty good quarterback room. If Kyler's centered and ready to go, that's a hell of a quarterback room. That would not be your issue. And I just think, like you said, they're feisty, they're fast, they're competitive at home. They're going to win 5 or 6 games. If Kyler comes back, they can win 6 or 7. Josh Dobbs can certainly make throws, good kid in the room, moves well. They'll win games. Justin Fields can't play. Like, you watch this, like, you can tell how teams defend him. They don't think he can play. They don't think he can see the field. They don't respect him. So much of this game is predicated on coaches will tell you what they think of their personnel. They'll also tell you what they think of their personnel. And I think Kansas City came into this game and said, we're going to be hyper aggressive. We don't care. We can make mistakes. Watching him today, I'm like, okay, I'm trying to be a good guy, right? Like, everybody in the media is trying to be nice. Zach Wilson came in kind of cocky. It was easy to go, he can't play. But when a guy comes in, it's a big city. He doesn't have a huge attitude. You see some tools. I thought after today, I'm like, wow, this is nobody in that building. No way Ryan Poles thinks this is the future, right?
I think the question is everyone in major trouble? I mean, they had a really rough week. Obviously, the situation with their defensive coordinator, the quarterback, like you said, he's a bad football player. Like, you can't, not only not franchise, these guys aren't starting quarterbacks. And I think you would ask yourself, well, would you want him as your backup? Because Joshua Dobbs, some of these guys you see as a backup, like, they can function. Look at Jordan Love now. He was a backup for a while. He's a functional player. How good their ceiling is, I don't know. But Justin Fields can't complete passes. At one point in time today, They were getting destroyed. It was in the fourth quarter. He had 16 pass attempts. They don't even trust to throw him. When he said this week, the coaching comment, which if you watch him say it, I don't think he was trying to drive a bus over the offensive coordinator.
Right.
But he was basically admitting, like, they want me to run a normal NFL offense where I go 1 to 2 to 3 and we try to pass like these other teams. And I can't do it because I turn into a robot and I don't know how to function. Part of being a great quarterback is kind of blending that instincts with the robotic nature, right? Because some of these throws, you got to just turn into a robot, dump it down for 4 yards, right?
Yeah.
And think at lightning speed. I mean, you're talking less than 3 Mississippis. That ball you're firing around, knowing the coverage, knowing the hot routes. There's a lot going on. It's why most people have no shot to do it. And he is completely overwhelmed. I thought his physical tools, I liked him as a college prospect. They don't translate really. Like, to me, the arm motion doesn't feel very smooth. Clearly now he's like trying to guide it. He has no clue where the ball's going. They are a mess, Colin. For as shitty as Denver was today, 70 points, you could argue that was even worse. There was a moment where Denver was feisty early. That game was it was a Taylor Swift party.
Yeah, and you do get to a point in Chicago, and I've said this, some of it's cultural. They don't do offense well. They've never had a star quarterback. Alshon Jeffrey's their best receiver. They've had very few great offensive lines. I mean, it's weird about this, John, and it's almost like every Laker team almost that's ever won a title has been flashy. Yeah. And every Celtic team that's ever won has been feisty because Boston's feisty, right? And LA's glitzy. Every Detroit team that's been great has been tough. Same with Pittsburgh. Like, you become your city or something. You become the culture around you. And Chicago is a Midwest, no BS, tough, in the mouth, beer and brats town, right? Like, it's my favorite big city in the country, but it's just authentic. It's real. They love their I can name 6 great linebackers for the Bears. I can't name 2 good receivers. And so they don't do offense well. They don't have a sense for it. They're not a touchy-feely organization. I mean, you can go to Kansas City. It could be Len Dawson. It's Alex Smith. It's Patrick Mahomes. They had Joe Montana. I mean, Kansas City's had like 7 different quarterbacks. Green Bay's Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. Jordan Love may make it. They just know how to develop quarterbacks. Chicago doesn't. They're still celebrating the 85 Bears. So to come in there, let's say Caleb Williams goes there. I don't trust this staff. I don't trust this front office.
I think depending on what comes out about this defensive coordinator, and I'm not laying the blame on anything he did in his personal life or even if it crossed over professionally on Eberflus. Like, these are grown men making millions of dollars. But there are moments where you can look back and go, that was the beginning of the end. And that situation, all the rumors floating, him having to resign, clearly people reporting today that it wasn't anything criminal, it was inappropriate. It'll be very fascinating as information comes out. But Caleb's dad has been on record about the situation in the draft. This situation, they have a defensive head coach whose defense is, it couldn't be any worse. I mean, it's as bad as it gets. The staff feels overwhelmed. The quarterback, which isn't their fault. I mean, these guys didn't draft him, but is getting worse by the week.
Yes.
So the narrative and the negativity surrounding this operation when the season ends is going to be at an all-time high, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of negativity from every angle. And you just wonder, a guy that is viewed as this all-time great player who's got some strong opinions and who's got some money and his dad's involved. Like, I don't think it's a lock that they just don't make a fuss about this. And I had people like DMing me, do you think that they would push the ownership to hire an offensive coach? It's kind of hard in football to do maneuvering like that. This isn't basketball. But I do think that in the next month or two, if I'm the owner of the Bears, and I've known people that work there, and that place is very old school. It's not just deep.
Yes.
It's just
very.
People that have worked several places, they're like, it's actually much closer to a mom and pop shop for some, organization that's worth $5 billion that anyone could even fathom. Right. So they got a lot. They need to do a lot of just kind of looking in the mirror and changing. But as long as the ownership is the ownership, I don't know if things are going to dramatically change, which is sad.
No. The ownership went to Bill Polian and said, "You lead our search," and he went and got Matt Eberflus. So, and I don't know much about Matt Eberflus. I have two people that know him, like him, nice guy. He inherited, they had to move off Roquan Smith. They had to move off some defensive players. So they're starting over. Then you become very beholden to your GM and who he can draft. But it's interesting. I've thought about the Bears. Like, where would you go if you flushed it and started over? And Lincoln Riley does not want to coach right now NFL football. Okay, So you're like, okay, the college guy. Ryan Day is more served to me. He's more high emotion. He's a college coach, not a pro coach. We saw it again this week, and I like him, but he's raw guy, school color guy, right? Like, so Kellen Moore, I don't think is ready for Chicago. I think he would get the Charger job if Staley got fired, so the Chargers wouldn't let him go.
Jim Harbaugh would make them probably too uncomfortable, right?
Harbaugh is somebody Harbaugh would go pro if Caleb Williams came out. I think it's the perfect time. Now, Harbaugh wants control of personnel. So could they do a situation like Sean Payton, where Sean Payton comes in, Harbaugh comes in, is not the initial GM. They just make it work for a year, and then I think Sean will basically take over some personnel here pretty quick.
I would agree.
But I just don't feel good at, and I'm not saying Justin Fields can play. It today was just like, this is bad. I think I'd start over. I think I would just flush it out and start over. Listen, a couple of years ago, Ryan Poles, the GM, drafted Velus Jones in the 3rd round, wide receiver USC, who transferred to Tennessee, couldn't play a lick at either place. It's like, Ryan, watch film. He couldn't track the ball. He's a receiver who couldn't track the ball. Like, I saw that pick, and I'm like, okay, they don't know what they're doing.
Well, I can't get over week 1 when Chase Claypool did what he did, which was nothing and didn't even try, and they got embarrassed, and they just didn't cut him the next day to kind of draw a line in the sand as their organization. This will not be tolerated. An Andy Reid, a Pete Carroll, that would never be allowed. Bill Belichick. And and you've been talking about this for a long time. Think about some of the coaches right now. Robert Saleh with Zach Wilson, Eberflus with Justin Fields. They can do nothing to help that guy, besides just philosophically be like, run the ball more. But they can't be in the meeting room, coaching them up, designing plays. So even when you get into a pinch, if you're Sean McVay last year, you can influence Baker Mayfield when you pick him up off the scrap because you're the guy going to be working with him. Or Kyle Shanahan, or all these, LaFleur with Jordan Love. They can work through things like you saw today. It was not going well. Then LaFleur's on a knee over with him. Robert Saleh's just on the sideline as Zach Wilson's running for his life, skipping balls. He has Mike Tomlin with Kenny Pickett. When things go bad, like, what can he actually do besides some Ryan Day rah-rah speeches? And I'm not saying they're not, capable and obviously accomplished and know what they're doing leading a group of men. But when it gets into the schematics and the coaching specifically of that position, these defensive coordinators that are head coaches just can't do much beside build some confidence by whispering in their ear.
Yeah, no, I think that's why I think with Chicago, I think you kind of burn it down, start it over. I think you go get a Caleb Williams. And I'm not saying Cliff Kingsbury would get a second shot. It felt like he was a little over his skis, but he did get them to the playoffs. And I know Kingsbury at USC and Caleb have a great relationship. And he feels like he I don't know if he'd ever want to go, to me, he's either, I think Cliff would like to get another pro job. But it's, basically Chicago's a cold weather Arizona where you don't trust the ownership. You don't trust the front office. You're as good as your quarterback. But as little confidence as I have in Justin Fields, I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And to your point, I don't think these defensive coordinators can figure it out. I do want to talk before we go about the Denver situation. It's obviously humiliating. And I had said this earlier, Denver's defense has been a mess this year. So obviously not all the blame goes on Russell Wilson. But this is going to be a fascinating cultural situation because Russell's never been really popular in the room. He's been popular with the public or the media, but not in the room. He leaves Seattle. He got dogged by like 5 guys. And so that's big to Sean Payton. I know Sean well enough. In the room is what he really cares about. That's why he said those things. Stop kissing babies, meaning who gives a shit what anybody outside the room thinks? Win the room over. I wonder if Sean Payton has already made a decision. Like, I'm out on this. This guy isn't me. It doesn't work. Because they're really polar opposites in terms of personality. How long before he bails completely?
I mean, I think he could make a change in the next 3 or 4 weeks and just justify it. We need a spark, though. Obviously, today Russell didn't give up 70 points. I mean, 70 points, Colin. That's I don't know how you shake that. I never thought they were a great fit, just personality wise. Clearly, Russell is not the same, and this organization needs a complete blow up. The problem is, what do you do? Right? The contract for several years, from dead cap money to cap space, the bonus you paid him, you're kind of stuck with him. He has no trade value, so you can't really get rid of him. Essentially, you probably 1 year, if you did get a really high pick, which they keep giving up 70 points, I'll promise you they will get one. Do you just cut him, take the enormous dead cap for like the year because it accelerates on your books, and just roll with a young quarterback and just kind of cut bait and move on? You know, the Eagles were lucky with Carson Wentz, right? They were able to kind of just get rid of him. And even though, and it actually ended up giving them a first-round pick from the Colts. But a lot of times in these situations, you can't unload it. And this one, to me, is not going to be an unloading situation. But he's got the quarterback, like you said, the GM. He didn't hire this GM. Like, this GM, he's playing nice for a year. This happens all the time. And then he'll bring in his own guy. Is the defensive coordinator Vance Joseph? Look at his resume lately. It is not going well.
No, he'll get
defense last year was good. And now today, I mean, they quit. The only way to give up 70 points is by quitting and tapping out and literally not trying. So he's going to have an entire organizational. He probably thought he had some, in terms of making some steps forward this offseason coming into the season, but it's clear that they're worse than last year. Like, it's pretty crazy because at least last year, the defensive coordinator that's now in Carolina, they were good on defense, at least for a long percentage of the season until they kind of ran out of juice. But I think Sean Payton's going to have to blow the entire thing up. And the Russ situation, you're just kind of stuck unless you want to cut him and just take, historically high dead cap. But then you got to rehaul your defensive staff. You don't have that, your draft picks. There'd just be a lot of pressure on this team because they are nowhere close. Today was, is that one of the most embarrassing days in the history of the NFL, you think, for one given team?
It's really ugly. I was thinking about this. So Sean and I'm not like a close, but we have a nice relationship. And, when, he had called me a couple times about Fox and negotiating a TV deal, and he really wanted to live in Manhattan Beach and coach the Chargers. And I thought he was just going to wait for a year because I didn't think Brandon Staley was going to last. And then we were communicating a lot. And then all of a sudden, Sean and I weren't communicating a lot. And my takeaway was, okay, so I didn't want to bother him and pester him. That's just, I've been doing this long enough. I know when somebody stops communicating, you're probably in negotiation. And I didn't know exactly who, but I kind of felt Denver because that's the stuff I was hearing about. And I got to be honest, I was surprised he took the job because he had said on the air there were concerns about Russell Wilson, right? And and this wasn't private conversation. He had, there's concerns about basketball on grass. Does he have it? So it's just so interesting because I would have bet my 401k a year ago that he would have just stayed. Fox was paying him, I imagine, good money. I know good money. He would have just stayed and just waited for the Charger situation. But it's funny with coaches. They always, I've seen and friends years ago, Mike Dunleavy took a Clipper job, and I'm like, Mike, you took the Blazers to the Western Conference Finals and arguably, outplayed the Lakers, Shaq and Kobe. But, somebody offers you 15, 18 million bucks or whatever it is. And I don't think this was ever an ideal fit, but money talks. And I look at it now and I think, yeah, all the things I thought could possibly go wrong, not his GM, Russ and him don't click, tough division. They're all realities today.
Don't you think the wild card in this situation is this ownership? I mean, this family, top 2 or 3 wealthiest family in the world, America definitely, and they are not used to failing ever. So, who knows the dynamics there? Obviously, Sean is, a very driven, intense individual. This family's used to things. I mean, they've been on, I wouldn't say easy street, but their business has been kind of on cruise control for a while. This has to be a shock to their system about what they're witnessing. And then the nature of, unlike when you own even major corporations, they just don't get talked about like they do in terms of you drive around Denver tomorrow, turn on sports radio, everyone's, talking shit about the thing you own. It's some people can't, especially the new owner syndrome, that can be overwhelming, and things can get weird. Things get weird fast.
Yeah. I think, the minute he could, he signed Jarrett Stidham. I think he had reservations. Sean went and looked at every throw Russell Wilson made. And I'm sure he saw things from the pocket. Greg Cosell comes on my show weekly. He's been saying it for years. Russell Wilson from the pocket leaves a lot of throws out there. Well, Sean saw that. And so he went and got Stidham, a guy that can run his offense, complete easy throws. So I just don't think this relationship is going to work. I don't think this is all on Russell, but you give up draft capital, you pay him, you're going to take the heat. And I do think the team quit today. So does that say the locker room's not great? The locker room's divided. I mean, you don't see teams in the NFL quit. Maybe once a year we see a team quit. You don't see them quit in week 3. Like that's a it's week 12, right? Everybody's, everything's put on film. So guys just don't quit in this league. You just don't. Monday it's on film. Week 3, guys quit. Like that tells me there's a cultural issue, and Russell's the biggest star in that room.
The saving grace for Sean, though, is he has the Raiders and the Chargers in his division. So
yeah,
it makes it a little bit easier if you could ever just get a couple pieces in there and get it rolling in the right direction.
All right, John Middlekauff, 3 and Out. This is our Sunday night, Monday morning podcast. Buddy, good seeing you as always.
Take it easy, Colin.